Grand Army of the Republic was one of the most effective fighting forces in the galaxy, and if you're a regular on this channel, you've probably heard us praise it time and time again. But the GAR wasn't without its problems, of course, and some would argue that those cons outnumbered the army's pros. Well guys, it's collab time once more, and today we're going to be teaming up with our friends over at Generation Tech to explore both sides of this argument. On our end, of course, we'll be discussing the Grand Army's pros. The Grand Army of the Republic, as most of us probably know, was originally grown on Kamino and consisted of millions of highly skilled clone troopers. These clones were trained for pretty much every situation and were vastly superior to battle droids due to their capacity for creative thought. Though the clones were originally hampered by low numbers, their numbers dramatically increased over the course of the war far above the original 3 million, according to the Essential Guide to Warfare, which evened out the odds a little bit. The clones were also aided by an exceptionally effective equipment set, with armor to protect clones from shrapnel and debris, high-powered blaster weapons that were effective at over 1 kilometer on maximum power, and an ever-increasing range of vehicles and vessels to back them up. The Grand Army's original complement of AT-TEs, gunships, SPHATs, speeders, and acclimators rapidly swelled to include dozens of types of walkers, light tanks, and heavy tanks, as well as multiple starfighter types like the heavy-hitting ARC 170 and the exceptionally fast V-Wing, and a respectable array of capital ship types. Of course, the clone army and the arsenal the Kaminoans ordered to go with it weren't the only parts of the Grand Army. All Jedi were given command ranks within the GAR, and shortly after the Battle of Geonosis, the Republic Judicial Forces and all local planetary defense forces were merged into the GAR as well. This meant that the Republic not only had clones at its disposal, but also capable tacticians and hundreds of local armies across the galaxy. Now let's get into some obvious pros for the Grand Army of the Republic. To start, we have skill. Clone troopers were vastly superior to the Confederacy's battle droids due to their 10 straight years of endless high quality training. They were prepared for pretty much any situation and could outmaneuver, outfight, and above all, outthink most battle droids out there. Even for the Republic's non-clone soldiers, namely those in the Judiciary Force and Planetary Security Forces, they were generally superior to the Confederacy's rebels and PSF soldiers because they were mostly better trained. The Judicials had plenty of experience and skill, while loyalist PSF soldiers generally coming from the richer areas of the galaxy, which could afford high quality security forces in the years before the Separatist crisis. Second, the Republic had a much better equipment set. The CIS, true to character, generally cheaped out on equipment, while the Kaminoans spared no expense in designing the Grand Army. The standard DC-15A blaster rifle had a range of up to 10 kilometers when mounted on a tripod and on maximum power, and was on the high power end of military weapons, especially against droids. On top of that, the Republic's most notable vehicles like the AT-TE, HAV-W A6 Juggernaut, and the LAAT gunship were pretty much unmatched, as the Confederacy generally preferred to use lighter vehicles that were of lesser quality. All of this gear, not to mention the clones themselves, came with a fairly large price tag to be fair, but it was one the Republic was ultimately willing to pay, and was more than worth it, considering the high quality that it got in return. A B-1 battle droid might have been a dozen times cheaper to produce and maintain than a clone trooper, but take into account the average kill ratio of 1 clone to 20 droids, which rose even higher later in the war, and you can see why the clones were nonetheless a better investment. Another advantage the Republic had was tacticians. No, we're not talking about the Jedi here. To be quite honest, the average Jedi kinda sucked when it came to battlefield planning. But the Republic did have some of the brightest military minds in the galaxy on its side, between the Planetary Security Forces and the Judicial Forces, and many more emerged midway through the war. The likes of Gideon Tarkin, Armin Issard, and Jen Dodona were all tactical geniuses, and all of them served the Republic. And as the Grand Army adjusted to war, they began to prove themselves as being a match for even the Confederacy's most skilled tacticians. Despite the fact that a large number of worlds in the CIS were industrial powerhouses like Medalorn and Mechas 3, the Republic actually had a significant advantage on the industrial front, though it took years for it to be fully exploited. By the last year of the war, the Grand Army of the Republic had a massive industrial machine backing it, one that proved to be much stronger than the Confederacy's. It was this industrial machine that allowed for the Outer Rim sieges to happen. Because of it, the Republic was finally able to outgrow the problem of fighting the stateless strategy, and could both attack and defend at once. And of course, the Grand Army of the Republic has the advantage of, well, fighting for the Republic. Regardless of the quality of the CIS military, it was fighting for a decentralized state that was less than 2 years old and controlled less than a quarter of the amount of territory that the Republic did, even after the Separatist crisis. The Republic had the advantage of having an old system to which people were accustomed, a centralized way of running things, and of course, much more territory. That's not something to be underestimated. Now that we've covered the more obvious pros of the GAR, let's take a look at some of the less obvious ones. On top of the other benefits of clones, loyalty was another one. As we've discussed in many videos recently, the vast majority of the clone army was not nearly as independent as the major characters we see in Star Wars: The Clone Wars. Many clones were unwaveringly loyal and had little to no qualms with existing purely to fight and die for a cause that they knew they would see no benefit from. Even though they knew this, the desertion rate for the clone army was very low, even after clones started to wise up near the end of the war. A fairly common misconception about the Grand Army of the Republic is that it was lacking in equipment diversity. In the more popular sources, the Republic appears to almost purely use walkers, larger starfighters, and energy-based weaponry. But if you delve into the expanded universe, that image changes. The Republic had a wide range of equipment at its disposal by the end of the war that allowed it to account for pretty much anything. Major Republic vehicles like the Juggernaut or the TX-130 tank had been designed with tracking missiles, so as to eliminate the problem that the early GAR had with a lack of non-line-of-sight weapons. Furthermore, the Republic quickly fixed its problem with the lack of starfighter diversity as well. By the end of the war, they had fighters for all manner of mission profiles, from heavy-hitting ARC-170s to nimble VWings to larger, slower planetary bombers. VWings in particular were extremely effective against Separatist starfighters, as they were better armed and nearly as fast as Vulture droids. Indeed, most Republic Star Destroyers actually carried more VWings than ARC-170s, with the stock model servicing 192 VWings as opposed to just 36 ARC-170s. Some of the greatest problems with the Grand Army has to do with the nature of its clone troopers. Clones took a long time to grow, 10 years in fact. It does appear that the Kaminoans plan to be required to constantly churn out new batches of troopers, considering that there are batches of developing clones shown in the AOTC that most definitely fit the description of units that are ready or well on their way. But this was a problem that the Republic actually solved. Near the start of the war, the Battle of Kartau resulted in Supreme Chancellor Palpatine receiving a large number of special Spartai cloning cylinders, which were installed on Centax II, a moon of Coruscant. These cylinders were capable of growing battle-ready clone troopers in only a year, and in massive numbers too. While Spartai clones were markedly less effective than the Kaminoan ones, they served to sufficiently supplement their numbers to solve the problem of growth times, and then some. Untold millions of Spartai clones were generated, and battalions of them were secretly slipped into the GAR by Palpatine up until the Battle of Coruscant, at which point the entire secret army was deployed. The existence of these clones nullifies the GAR's numbers problem, especially if you rule out the involvement of the Sith. The CIS had a numbers advantage even with the Spartai clones, but as anyone who's watched anything with battle droids in it will tell you, that didn't mean much. As we said before, the average clone could easily dispose of 20 battle droids before going down, and combine that baseline with superior vehicles in Jedi, and suddenly, being outnumbered has a lot less weight. And to be fair to the clones, any army that fought the CIS would have been outnumbered. Any alternative fighting force that the Republic could have assembled, or even all of them plus the clones, would have been outnumbered anyway. The final nail in the coffin for the numbers problem is one that's little known and rarely discussed: conscription. Nearly all depiction of the Grand Army of the Republic focuses on its central element, which was the clone army. But the Grand Army of the Republic was not just clones. As we said earlier, the Republic's planetary security forces had merged with the GAR at the start of the war, and every PSF in the Republic began conscription not long after the Battle of Geonosis. Republic conscripts were almost all stationed to defend their worlds, allowing the clones to only guard the most important targets, which is why we rarely see the conscripts in stories. Indeed, to quote the Essential Guide to Warfare, many of the battles of the Clone Wars were fought between armies of organics, with no battle droids or clone troopers in sight. In some divided sectors, battles were fought by soldiers on both sides wearing identical uniforms, and opposing fleets were made up of the same classes of warships and starfighters, with only new insignia and hastily applied coats of paint indicating the change of allegiance. Obviously, there are ethical problems with growing hordes of men just to die in battle, but the same could be argued for producing armies of droids that are clearly sentient with the same purpose, not to mention forcing regular people to go out and die for you. Though that assessment might be a little bit harsh, it was an assessment shared by most clones, nearly none of whom had a problem with existing to see the stars with their bodies. Furthermore, those clones that survived the war weren't just kind of dropped by the Republic, unlike many normal soldiers. In fact, the Empire did actually have a program in place to deal with them, as we've discussed in other videos before. The Kaminoans gave no thought to the possibility of clone retirement, but the Republic and even the Empire that followed were a little bit more empathetic. While the Republic didn't allow clones to retire during the war for obvious reasons, when it became the Empire, things began to change. As the ranks of the Stormtrooper Corps began to be filled by newer clone batches and natural recruits, the Empire offered aging clones a choice. They could continue to serve the Empire as training advisors on Kamino, Corridor, and other such worlds, or they could retire as they wished. In both cases, the clones were actually treated pretty well, likely because the Empire knew how effective they were and feared their wrath. While it's unknown when the clone retirement program was developed exactly, it's not far-fetched to say that the Republic at least considered it, though it was more likely a product of the Empire. Retired clones were usually treated like regular citizens, better even, since they were human and therefore had more privileges than non-human species. They enjoyed the benefits of full Imperial citizens, and while it's unknown if the Empire offered them pensions or anything, it can be presumed that this was the case, as most clones who had retired had aged past the age of effectiveness for most jobs. Those retired clones that we know of who weren't too old to work often made small fortunes as mercenary contractors, especially on the Outer Rim. Had clones begun to retire sooner, it could have even been a boost for the Empire or the Republic. Even aside from military roles, a massive workforce of clones could help boost the galactic economy, especially if the Republic managed to find a way to fix advanced aging. Done right, clone retirement could have been a major benefit. We'll never know if this is entirely correct due to the way galactic history went, but it adds another pro for the Grand Army of the Republic to an already long list of them. Well, that was our analysis of everything that was right about the Grand Army of the Republic, and make sure you check out Generation Tech's counter video where he analyzes everything wrong with the Grand Army of the Republic. I'm sure they'll present some interesting points too, although I dare say that, like the Republic, we started with a bit of a tactical advantage this time round. So be sure to comment on which viewpoint you agree with, and make sure you don't get sucked in by any humanity first propaganda, because we're not specious on this channel, boys. Anyways guys, thank you for watching, and shout out to Generation Tech for the always awesome collabs, and I hope to see you all in the next video.